Who am I? My name is Megan Mason, and for as long as I can remember, the main aspiration in my life, what I wanted to be, for a long time, what I was a mother. I really wanted to have children and be a mother. I wanted to do it so much that I took low paying jobs in early childhood education, taking care of other people's children to make money and find a husband, ideally. I actually had a savings account called Baby in case I didn't find a husband, where I was just going to move to a small town and have a baby on my own. That was my life goal, my biggest ambition when I married Peter Matt. And he was a German. He pretended he was a banker at the time, really just a swindler. He swept me off my feet, charmed my whole family, including my grandmother, who I was very close to, and um, and he said that he would take care of me. And instead, when we got married, I thought he was mentally ill. I went to support groups for people with ADHD. I tried to get him to go to therapy because he was just so crazy and confused, and he kept losing money. And our life was always in chaos. And even though he had wealth in Germany, we lived in poverty and really struggled day to day. And I now understand that he was pretty much recreating the stress that I'd grown up in childhood poverty in order to keep me always destabilized, always dependent on him, always hustling, always trying to do what he wanted me to do so that our family could finally get to a secure place where we'd be able to go to the grocery store and my card wouldn't be declined. But then eventually I realized I couldn't fix him, and both my children had lead poisoning because he was literally pulling the house down around us. So I got the boys out, and in 2016 I left him, and we entered into a collaborative divorce with a coach named Rosalind Sadaka. And we were meeting and working towards that when Peter sprung a surprise restraining order on me. And from that moment onward, using an attorney named Steve Klein, who I now understand is pretty much a mob fixer who sells child custody. Using this attorney, he abused me through the court for years before I discovered actual evidence of crimes. And then when I testified about the crimes, um, even though there was an active federal criminal investigation and I was issued whistleblower numbers, Merrick Garland shut down the case. Uh, the press made a concerted effort to hide the case because there are many more women. It's not just this one crazy bitch you're looking at. On August 14th, 2020, a group of 28 female attorneys in Chicago wrote an open letter to the press trying to expose the corruption case that has destroyed my family. And that story was buried. We've all been buried. It wasn't oversight, it wasn't accidental. It's the largest judicial corruption case in U.S. history, and it is going to take out J.B. Pritzker and every other powerful Democrat. It's my belief that there is a strategy, not by the Trump administration, but by the people who would plan to take power next. I believe that J.D. Vance, Peter Thiel, other actors see an advantage to taking out the Illinois government when the time comes. And I think unless Illinois Democrats, national Democrats, fix the corruption in the party now, get JB Pritzker out now, he's going to bring the whole party down. And I think that's what JD Vance's plan is. So obviously, I'm just a blonde. I'm just confused. I've heard it all. Here's the thing. Um, Paralegals out there who know better, especially occasionally a lawyer will deign to dip into my comments. You know how it is. You've seen ladies like me. You know how confused the poor dear is. I just need a good lawyer. Poor little thing. Tried to do things on my own. Tried to figure these things out, and I should have asked for the help of a big boy lawyer. That's not exactly the situation. So why is it not true that I'm just unhappy with my case? I'm not in a case. I was divorced in 2017. And what that means is that every action that Judge Johnson and other court appointees given authority um, have, every order has been illegal. Every action has been illegal. And the case will never end because the case has never started. I call it the dystopian clusterfuck. And it's corruption. It's the breakdown of the judiciary, and Illinois is gone. And this might be how it ends in your state. This might be what it looks like before suddenly. Why would women over 70 really need to have houses? You know, they're so emotional. Why would 70-year-old women need houses when we have probate courts that work just like the family law courts, totally opaque, no civil rights? If somebody commits crimes against you, hello, Brittany, you're fucked. Judges can just ignore the law and nobody will stop them. Nobody will advocate for you. This is America. So, so it's not, when people say you're unhappy with your case, what they're saying is they're looking at an arena and a game being played in an arena. And they're like, oh, the game has complicated rules. You need lawyers to figure out the rules of the games. And you need judges, you need referees to call or whatever, umpires, strikes and balls. My point is, it has nothing to do with any game. It's my problem is that the arena is on fire. So you can't worry about the rules of the game because the arena is on fire and my hair is burning, my skin's melting off. And it doesn't matter what the rules of the game are when the arena is on fire. And the problem is nobody believes that the arena is on fire. I'm a Cassandra, I'm a Chicken Little, but there is no rule of law in the Domestic Relations Division of the Circuit Court of Cook County. There is no rule of law in the Illinois First Appellate Court, where I've tried to access my right of appeal 3 times. There is no rule of law in the Illinois Supreme Court, where I've tried to access my right of appeal once, and where they are given the authority to do independent investigations and could have taken this matter on their own. But they declined to do so because there is no rule of law in the state of Illinois for mothers and children or anyone who crosses powerful Democrats. And then once you give up on Illinois and you try to get federal relief, there's no rule of law there, because even if you access a Reagan appointee named Charles Norville, who wants nothing more than to shut down corruption by the Chicago Democratic Party, the DOJ is going to say, no, Judge Norville, you can't let this woman's meritorious civil case proceed because the feds have a case. And so when I tried to sue these people under color of law and under federal RICO civil, in 2022, my case couldn't proceed because the Department of Justice was building a case in these matters. And because Merrick Garland shut down the DOJ's case, there is no investigation by anybody. Many of these things could be prosecuted by Illinois. J.B. Pritzker is not going to prosecute these crimes, and he's going to try to get people's votes claiming that he's going to replace a corrupt administration. So there is no rule of law in Illinois for me, and if there's no rule of law for me, eventually there will be no rule of law for you. So store up your guns and your money, because it's every man for himself. So yeah, I just need a lawyer, right? What I just said, those are the ravings of a woman who doesn't understand the delicate balance of the legal profession. It's complicated, it's confusing. I've had very many lawyers. So let's start. So first there's Rosalind Sadaka, who we paid to be a coach. And while I thought I was doing a collaborative divorce, Peter sprang a restraining order on me and started an adversarial divorce process. I hired an attorney named Mary Catherine Avery. Somehow I got together $10,000 to give her a retainer. I was unable over the course of a few months to get a settlement from Peter. There were no meetings, and anytime we'd gone to court, Mary Catherine had been sick and the associate had flopped. I was not getting anywhere. And at the time I was dating somebody who he he was really unhappy with his divorce settlement. He said his wife's lawyer was a real asshole, and I said, well, maybe I should talk to that guy. So I hired a guy, and he was a massive asshole. He really delivered, from a firm called Berger Schatz. So this fancy firm from Highland Park came down. I thought, finally, I'm going to get ahead. And he worked for 1 month when I was in the middle of my divorce. And first, let me try to explain to you what I wanted in my divorce when I left Peter. We had bought a house in Wilmette for cash. We paid cash, and it was about $420,000. So I wanted $210,000 cash. I wanted half of the house. For the business, I wanted $0. Peter owned 3 companies: Godecki and Associates, Godecki Poland, Godecki India, fourth, Godecki Germany. And since I had left the business in 2012 because of his tax evasion, among other things, he had not been declaring any of these businesses. So I didn't want to profit in any way from his criminal activity because I knew I hadn't participated in crimes. I knew I had protection as a spouse for not reporting them. I'd done a lot of research. At that point, eventually I would even talk to my compliance officer at Morgan Stanley to make sure that I didn't need to report Peter in 2018 for his federal crimes, which were voluminous. And Morgan Stanley advised me not to report him without getting my own criminal defense attorney. They advised me not to make the report. That was why I made that choice, to give him a little. And that was a mistake because there might have been law enforcement at that time. So the problem was I still was personally liable. Not Peter, not our house, just Megan Mason, Megan Matt at the time. I was personally liable for $500,000 in loans on Peter's businesses. So I didn't want any money from the businesses, but I wanted no liability. So I had tried to get him to file bankruptcy. Here's an interesting thing about the way Peter was doing tax evasion. He was also hiding his assets from me. So when I say that, like, the family was impoverished, there was never money, he would claim to me he wouldn't get a job, and he was unable to watch the children. So like if I worked, he wasn't qualified to be their babysitter. He did too bad a job. It was too dangerous. So I needed to pay for childcare, frankly, somebody to watch him, and I needed to pay for somebody to watch the children, and then I needed to earn money, and then I needed money on top of that. That was why I needed to cut Peter when he wasn't just dead weight, when he was toxic weight, when my kids had lead poisoning. Because it's one thing to drag the family down, but when you start actually poisoning the children, then it's time to go. But at the time that he wasn't working, I'd reached out to Leo Matt, Peter's father, and said, Peter refuses to work, he won't do anything, maybe he needs therapy. And Leo said, if you think my son's sick, you should get a divorce. Noted. And then the second time I reached out to him, I said, Leo, I need you to stop loaning your crazy kid money because he won't get a job. And maybe if you stop loaning him money, he'll get off his ass and get a job. And Leo wrote back, no way. Why would I encourage Peter to go get a job when his businesses are making all this money? And I said, what money? And he sent me, I said, I'd love to see the bank statements. So he sent me all the bank statements, and he sent me all the financial statements showing that Peter, had 4 businesses, was filing taxes in these companies, in these countries, had bank accounts there, had transferred our assets to his father. The business was based in his father's house. The business bank accounts were in his father's house. So he showed me all of that shortly before I left Peter, to prove to me that I was a stupid, foolish woman to think that his son should go get a job when he was making so much money. And that was their philosophy, was that on paper that Peter had a glorious, massive spreadsheet. So I should be happy with the way the spreadsheet looked, even though I was never able to touch that money. And that was drilled in me early on. When the first year that I worked at Peter's business, I was allowed to have a salary. One year I got to keep a salary. Every year after that, the business reported a salary, and I paid taxes on the salary because once you've reported it, you better pay it. But I I was a kindergarten teacher, and I was married to an investment banker who had gotten an MBA focused on accounting. So I was an idiot about all money stuff, and he had to help me learn. And I had been in the habit of putting money in things like savings accounts because I was just a working class girl, and we were so stupid. We would just like earn money, spend less than we earned, and then save. And he was teaching me what it meant to be a capitalist. And only an idiot would stick money in a savings account. In those years, interest rates were low, when the margins from IBM could be as high as 80%. Are you an idiot, Megan? Do you think that 1% is better than 80%? Why would we take our family's money out of the business to stick it in a bank account just because you're stupid and scared and you don't know about business like me? Why would we do that when we could keep the business money in the business? And it never occurred to me that I lived in a world where when I would leave him, that would mean that not only would I not get to have any of that money, but that he would get to always take all money that I ever earn if I'm ever able to earn money ever again, which increasingly I can't do. So then all I wanted was $0 for the business, not to go to jail, and a little over $200,000 for the house. And Peter didn't want me to have anything. He didn't think I should have anything. And that was the problem. So he just thought I should not be able to get divorced. He thought I should not get money for the house, and he thought I should not get money for the business. And it turns out that if you don't want to get divorced and you just want to hurt someone, courts like that, lawyers like that, they're like, this is a great plan. So I had my big swinging dick lawyer, what's his name? Drew Eichner from Burger Shots. God, he's a piece of shit. So I get this guy, and he's working me. So he was working for me for 1 month, maybe 3, I don't know. We didn't have any meetings with Peter. Nobody submitted a proposal for a settlement. I don't think there was maybe one court hearing, at the most one court appearance. And my bill was at $75,000. So I read the writing on the wall. I realized this is where, and this is interesting. I just figured I had to take the lumps, even though everything in my gut said this lawyer that I hired is not working in my interest. I could not imagine a way that $75,000 was used in billable hours legitimately. But I know what it's like to go up against someone like that. I knew there was no point in trying to complain or even trying to look at how he'd bill, because he would scream at me like, what do you think? And I wasn't going to do that. So I just fired him, and I was out of money. I knew at that point to retain a new lawyer and go through this to fight over what was just owed to me by statute. Like you're supposed to give me half the house. So I had to proceed for the rest of the divorce pro se. And it was basically kind of handled like an auction in court with the receiver, where the problem is Peter and his attorney could not let me not take money for the business, because that would just shine light on the fact that it wasn't really a business. I didn't really earn income when I was there, that it was all just tax evasion and the front. That was why he didn't want me to leave him, because he needed me as a front for the money laundering. But then he figured out he could use the kids. And I mean, especially my son Angus is never going to refuse to sign fraudulent documents for his dad. So, and I managed to get the divorce, and he managed to get out. And I just thought that I could finally escape him and build my life, but it just got worse, monumentally worse. Any pretense to sue me, any pretense to hurt the children through me or hurt me through the children. My son Angus, even though he's almost 18, he's not responsible as a typical 17-year-old. He's not as capable or responsible for his behaviors. Uh, I've had a lot of people in my life with limited empathy, so sometimes it can be hard because one aspect of our family that people close to me understood, but for very many good reasons, I tried not to make very much known to the public, mostly to protect Angus's dignity. Angus, as he got older, really like after we were divorced, so from like 2017, it got bigger. He began to get much more violent, mostly towards his brother, but also towards me, punching me, choking me. But with his brother, there was sometimes he would choke him and sometimes bite him. And at that time, we were seeing a developmental pediatrician from the University of Chicago who sits on American Pediatric Academy boards, who is also the husband of a good friend of mine. And that was how we met. Was like she knew my son was in her daughter's class, and they're advocates for people with special needs, and they're progressives like me. And so she's like, well, my husband is this, prominent developmental pediatrician. So we were very lucky to have him as a doctor. But Peter did not like the fact that the only kind of person who is more kind of fastidious about rules and ethics than a Catholic doctor is a progressive Catholic doctor. So he was very strict about not like if Angus would be in the house playing, he would not come home. He would be in another room so that Angus wouldn't see him because for he always anticipated that he might have to testify because of our situation or because of treatment. It wasn't good to have a personal relationship with Angus. But Peter was always distrustful of him and wouldn't follow any recommendations. So Dr. Smith had recommended medication for Peter. Freudian slip. Dr. Smith had recommended medication for Angus. Specifically, we were concerned about him biting Teddy, and Peter would not let him have medication. Dr. Smith wanted us to try separate custody, which is pretty extreme, but it was because of the choking and the hitting. So we were gonna. It would have been more work for both of us. So, but I was willing to do it. Peter refused. So he wouldn't do any of the interventions to keep Teddy safe. And it wasn't because Peter had different ideas. It wasn't because Peter uh, had any concerns about Angus getting medical help. He never had any concerns about Angus's health care before we were divorced. The reason he did this was to hurt me. He abused me by constantly creating chaos and pain in the children. He's a fucking monster. And family court is made for monsters like that with deep pockets. That's why they're there. So even though I felt like my lawyer from Burger Schatz had gouged me and finished my divorce pro se, I was really desperate because my older son was hurting my younger son, and Peter wouldn't do anything. I felt like I had no choice but to try to get the court to force Peter to allow Angus to have the medication that his doctor was prescribing. Because that was the only way I knew of to try to protect my other son at his father's house, because I couldn't watch him when he was there. And so I a few months into working at Morgan Stanley, I found out I was going to get a big tax return. I guess it was 2018. It was Trump's first big tax return. And so every time in the last decade I've gotten like five or $10,000, I just take it, I go to a barbecue, I put lighter fluid on it and I burn it. And it it's insane. I've done it so many fucking times. Like you have no idea what it feels like to be a poor girl who saves $10,000. You don't know what that feels like. But then to be a poor girl who saves $10,000 and then has to give it to your husband or a lawyer over and over and over and over. God, that's hard. It's really, really hard to keep doing this. This was one of the first times I was like, I'm going to get a tax return. So, nope, not going to try to get a 401k again. Instead, I'm going to hire a lawyer and burn it up. And because then maybe my abusive ex-husband can be forced to let my son take his psychiatric medication so my other son doesn't get hurt. That's what I get to use my money for. And so I was talking to this lawyer. And the reason I mention this is because I was talking to him or talking to his assistant, Patty, emailing, emails with timestamps on December 3rd, 2018. And it was weird because I was doing my insurance training. So I was downtown Chicago. I wasn't at home. But I was writing while I would go into the conference room. I was at a hotel, do the training. And then, because I was in a hurry to hire this lawyer. So that day of talking to this lawyer, who hadn't been retained yet, so he wasn't on the record, but there was a record because God works in weird ways. So while I was talking to him, I got home and I found out that same day that Peter had been in court and Judge Johnson had entered an order finding me in contempt of court. This was December 3rd, 2018. Obviously, I wasn't in court because I was at the insurance training talking to this lawyer. It's important that it was a lawyer because Judge Johnson issued an order allowing me to appear pro se. That was the first time he entered a fraudulent entry at a fraudulent hearing to say that I was at court, to say that I had been served about court. I hadn't been served. The notice came after the court hearing in the mail, snail mail, not emailed, even though Peter's lawyer emailed everything. So obviously it was intentional. Um, so if I hadn't been talking to a lawyer that day, then it just would have been entered. But instead of hiring him to get Angus medication, I had to hire him to get the first fraudulent contempt order vacated. What's interesting, and this is granular, um, but so for lawyers, I'm seeing that I see now as a layperson that Judge Johnson and his clerk, Kay Mason, one of them, probably Kay, with Judge Johnson's consent and awareness, entered an order allowing Megan Mason to appear pro se in his court. So they entered a fraudulent order saying I was there. Judge Johnson has done that at least 3 times. So I didn't understand at the time what had happened, but I did hire Drew Eichner, who came in and burned up my tax return, and that contempt ruling was vacated. But he never explained to me that Judge Johnson had entered a fraudulent order allowing me to appear pro se. So that was kind of interesting. But it seems to me now that an attorney looking at that fraudulent contempt hearing should have noticed things that as a layperson I now can notice. So that makes me feel like there's a really high level of complicity among all the lawyers in Chicago. And I just kept fighting. That was why I had to work at an investment bank, which is not something most socialist kindergarten teachers do. And I just thought that eventually, the judge would see the light. I couldn't have believed in the kind of real corruption that I was under. Because, like you, I didn't think that could really happen in America today. So I just knew that if I kept working hard within the system would reward me because that's how it is, right? Good girls get rewards. And, but it was just constantly a battle trying to get the children's needs met and Peter suing me in order to make sure I was always in poverty. Even when I was making six figures, I would just basically have to take my money out back and burn it every day. And even though I had so many more material things then, this was before I lost housing and all my things were auctioned out of storage. It was harder even when I had a six-figure job and housing and a lot of stuff. It was harder because I was constantly on the precipice. So I sort of felt like I was like tensing and like my body was about to be impaled. It's easier now because I've been impaled. You know what I mean? So it's like the pain is there, but I'm not like, oh no, I'm worried. I'm worried that I might fall into poverty. Check. I'm worried that everyone will think I'm crazy. Check. I'm worried I'll lose my children. That that's constant. That you can't really check. But at least I don't have fear because I just really just the mercy of death is what I look forward to. So there's not much to fear anymore. Back to lawyers. Mm. So are we still at Andrew Eichner? Oh, that's a lot of lawyers. But you know who has a really hard time with somebody like me not having a lawyer? Especially like progressives. Because and I know because I am one, but progressives, we kind of think that we understand the rules and we think civil rights victims, it just happens to confuse people, that we are righteous and enlightened and the ACLU will just deliver enlightened legal protections in those very few random corners where injustice occurs. And it always occurs to Black people, never white people. That's also something that in Chicago they believe. So that's a problem because I'm not Black, so that's a problem. And but civil rights abuses do happen to people, and they happen to women because they're women, but because there's no equal rights amendment, we can't prosecute on that basis. So we just have less legal standing. That's why there aren't civil rights cases involving white people. It's not that there aren't civil rights abuses. We just don't have standing. So, and there is nobody who wants to take the time to do that. The American Civil Liberties Union wants to be a lobbying organization, and they have transformed very successfully to a lobbying organization. They have no interest in protecting the civil rights of American citizens. They are a fundraising brand. That's what they do. There is no organization that protects American civil rights. And any organization that claims to do that can suck my dick. So, but the people at my church just could not fathom that I could proceed through the world without legal protection. And my ex husband started making threats at the church. This is men are such dicks because this like conflict with Peter, I've had men listen to me describe it and take his side, and it's really ridiculous because the key thing to remember about this conflict is that there was never a conflict. There was never an occasion where my son Teddy at the age of 7 had a soccer game on a Sunday morning. That wasn't when he played soccer. His soccer games were on Saturdays. There just happened to be a conversation. I don't even know if I spoke to Peter or to Teddy. I just happened to say to Teddy that I wanted him to go to Sunday school. We were going to Sunday school at the church. And I said that I was choosing for him to go to Sunday school until he was 12. And when he was 12, he could decide. And his father got really upset because that and Sundays were my parenting time. So they weren't, the court had said that was when I was the parent. But his father was really upset because hypothetically there might be a soccer game, and Teddy at 7 might not be able to go to the soccer game because hypothetically he might be at church. So Peter wrote the church and called the church to make threats and said that if the children went to the church, he would call the Evanston police to have them removed. And the people at my church, because of my crazy ex-husband calling and making threats, they they noticed that I was a domestic violence victim, and I said yes. And they were like, people help domestic violence victims. And I said, no, that's not how it works. They were like, oh, no, they do. And I was like, yeah, you think they do, but they don't. And she said, this was Kaitha Morris Hoffer. She's the head of a sexual violence network. She's like, no, you just, there are all these groups that will help you because I'm part of a group and woke people have groups for people. So we're going to find your group, girl. So Lifespan was going to be my group, and they provide legal services to domestic violence victims. And I spoke to them, and they said, no, we will not help you. And I said, yep. And they said, but we do have a list of private attorneys who look for victims. They love victims. And they gave me the name of a man named Brad Trowbridge. And I talked to him, but I didn't want to hire a lawyer, didn't need one. And then a few months later, all of a sudden, Peter got a guardian ad litem appointed. We were divorced. There was no case. There was just suddenly this appointment. So I went to Brad Trowbridge to get Michael Bender, the guardian ad litem, removed. So I hired this guy, Brad Trowbridge, and he defrauded me. He didn't even file an appearance because he was talking about my case to Michael Bender. Because it turns out Michael Bender is a kingmaker in the Circuit Court of Cook County. He is the law partner of a guardian ad litem named David Pasulka, who told Chicago mothers that they had to have sex with him if they wanted custody of their children. And the reason he could take their children away by threatening child custody is because of the patronage system in the Cook County machine. David Pasulka got to decide which associate judges become circuit court judges because whoever gets the Democratic Party nomination gets to be judge. And Pasulka picked the Democratic nomination. And so judges who wanted that nomination ruled the way Pasulka said they should rule. So if you were a mother and you got Pasulka and that judge, you were going to do what Pasulka told you to do. And if you were, say, a father who wanted to buy child custody because your bitch wife left you, then Pasulka is the kind of guy who can make that happen. And when Pasulka got arrested, his law partner, Michael Bender, became the guy who could help you destroy your bitch ex-wife in a Chicago divorce court. And he destroyed me. I'm the bitch ex-wife. And he took my children away after I testified about him. He took my children away after Merrick Garland issued me whistleblower numbers, ostensibly to protect me from my testimony about him. But Merrick Garland wanted me and my case buried. And he might get that. But I didn't know that about Brad Trowbridge. I discovered that a couple years later. I thought he was on cocaine because he just messed up a contempt allegation, but messing up the contempt allegation is what was used to take my children away. He wasn't on cocaine. He was throwing my case for Michael Bender. That's why he hadn't filed the appearance, because he wanted to make it so that the time to have Michael Bender removed had lapsed, the 30 days during which he could have filed the motion to reconsider or an appeal, which is why I hired him, why I went into his office. I want you to file an appeal. It should be a motion to reconsider. That was his job. He didn't do that job. He didn't file the appearance. He threw my case, and Michael Bender made him a judge. And people like Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky helped him. After he defrauded me, Jan Schakowsky and the Cook County machine endorsed him because he defrauded me. They probably didn't know about the fraud, but they knew that patron Michael Bender told him to endorse Brad Trowbridge. So Brad wasn't a great lawyer. And after I had discovered that Brad had defrauded me, there was also a custody evaluator solicited a bribe on an email. Judge Johnson was on the bribery email, and he's punished me over and over again for asking to see the rest of the bribery email and for testifying about the bribery email. He's retaliated against me for my testimony repeatedly. And before that happened, I I just thought that I could get somebody to rescue me. I thought that I could bring some attention to the civil rights case. So I went again to my woke church, and they said, "No, you really need a lawyer." And I said, "Well, at this point, no lawyer will work with me because I've burned so many bridges and powerful people hate me." They said, "Oh, people will one of those many free legal aid organizations will help me." Again, they don't exist for me. And then they referred me to private attorneys, and no, they specifically said no. One of them said, "I will not work with that guardian ad litem judge combination." And one of them said, "No, I would never work with that judge." And but then one of them said, the other day I saw this crazy associate, and she just seemed fearless. Maybe she'd talk to you." And she did. I signed an NDA at a later date. I will say an appearance was filed in my case in, I believe it was July 2022. And that in November, a motion was filed in my case seeking a professional seeking leave to withdraw for philosophical differences. But I would say before that motion was entered in November of 2022, I did send an email to a professional. The subject of my email was "Summary of Crimes I've Reported to You."